There are betrayals that announce themselves loudly, affairs, arguments, doors slamming, words you can point to and say, that was the moment everything broke. And then there are the betrayals that happen quietly, on paper, in signatures you trusted, in accounts you didn't check because you believed love meant safety. This is the story of the second kind. I didn't lose everything in one dramatic moment. I lost it slowly, while still believing I was secure. If you're watching this right now, before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. What city, what state, what country? Because financial betrayal doesn't belong to one place. It lives in ordinary homes everywhere, hiding behind closed doors and shared last names. I was married. We had a house, a mortgage, 2 cars, credit cards, the things people associate with stability, the things people point to when they say, "She'll be fine." What they don't talk about is what happens when one person controls the money and the other trusts too deeply. He handled the finances, not because I couldn't, but because he insisted. He said it made sense. He said he was better with numbers. He said I didn't need to stress about it. And I believed him. Because marriage is supposed to mean partnership. It's supposed to mean protection. It's supposed to mean that when your name is attached to something, your future is safe in the hands of the person beside you. I didn't know he was using my credit cards. I didn't know he was taking loans in my name. I didn't know payments were being skipped. Because financial abuse doesn't look like violence. It looks like confidence, like reassurance, like someone saying, "I've got this," while quietly burning the ground beneath you. The first letter arrived on a Tuesday. I remember because I almost threw it away with the junk mail. It didn't look urgent. Just another envelope with my name printed neatly on the front. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter, half listening to my child in the next room. Past due. I laughed at first, actually laughed, because it didn't make sense. We were fine. We had money. We had a plan. When I asked him about it, he waved it off, said it was a mistake, said the bank messed up, said not to worry. So I didn't. The second letter came 2 weeks later. Then the calls started. Unknown numbers, voicemails. Polite at first, then firmer, then cold. I asked again. This time he got defensive, said I was stressing for no reason, said I didn't trust him, said everything people say when they're trying to redirect attention away from the truth. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him, because the alternative meant my entire life was standing on lies. The car was the first thing to go. I remember waking up one morning, walking outside and seeing the empty driveway. I stood there, longer than I should have, staring at the space where my car used to be, my mind refusing to catch up with reality. Repossession. I felt something break inside me that had nothing to do with transportation. That car wasn't just a vehicle. It was freedom. It was work. It was school drop-offs. It was emergency exits. It was independence. I didn't cry right away. I went back inside and made breakfast like everything was normal. Because children don't need panic for breakfast. They need routine. Later, alone in the bathroom, I slid down against the door and cried silently into my hands. That was when I started digging. Credit reports, bank statements, loan documents. What I found felt unreal. Maxed out credit cards I hadn't used. Missed payments I didn't know existed. Accounts in my name I had never agreed to. I felt sick, not just scared, violated. Because money isn't just money. It's shelter, it's safety, it's the future you promise your child without realizing you're promising it. When I confronted him with the evidence, he didn't deny it. He minimized it, said he was under pressure, said he meant to fix it, said I was overreacting. Then, when the damage became undeniable, he left, not with apologies, not with explanations, with silence and empty accounts. I became a single mother overnight, not just emotionally, but financially ruined. The calls didn't stop, the letters multiplied, the mortgage notices arrived like a countdown. I learned very quickly that banks don't care about betrayal. They don't care about context. They don't care about who caused the damage. They care about whose name is on the debt. Mine. I spent hours on hold explaining my story to strangers trained not to feel. I learned words like delinquency, default, foreclosure, words that sound clinical but destroy lives. At night, after my child slept, I sat at the kitchen table with stacks of paper, calculator in hand, trying to solve a problem that had no solution. I was working full time and still falling behind. That kind of stress lives in your body. It tightens your chest, steals your sleep, makes your thoughts race even when you're exhausted. I woke up every morning already tired, already afraid. I started choosing which bills to pay, which ones could wait, which ones couldn't. I learned how to sound calm while negotiating extensions on the phone, even when my hands were shaking. I stopped buying anything that wasn't essential. No extras, no comfort, no margin for error. My child noticed the changes. Why don't we go places anymore? Why do you look tired all the time? I told them we were cutting back, that things were changing. I didn't say someone had dismantled our life from the inside. Shame is a heavy thing to carry when you're already struggling. The foreclosure notice came on a Friday. I remember the date because it ruined weekends for a long time after that. I stood in the kitchen reading legal language that told me the house, the one place I thought I could protect, was slipping away. I cried quietly again. I wiped my face again. I kept going again because single mothers don't get to fall apart all at once. We do it in pieces, in private, between responsibilities. And that was only the beginning. The credit collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened in pieces. Small enough at first that I thought I could outrun it. I told myself I just needed time. A few paychecks, one good month, one break. But credit doesn't wait. Every late payment was a quiet mark against my name. Every missed deadline closed another door I hadn't even knocked on yet. I watched my score drop like something alive that was slowly bleeding out, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop it. I learned how invisible financial ruin is until it isn't. I still showed up to work on time. I still packed lunches. I still smiled at people who had no idea I was collapsing quietly behind my eyes. And then the shame started creeping in. Not because I had done something wrong, but because poverty in America is treated like a personal failure. I stopped answering phone calls. I stopped opening mail immediately. I started avoiding places where people might ask questions. Friends talked about vacations, upgrades, plans. I nodded along, calculating whether I had enough gas to make it home. I avoided social gatherings because they cost money and because pretending everything was fine was exhausting. I learned how to say maybe next time in a way that sounded casual, even when it wasn't. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from struggling in a society that assumes stability. When your car's gone, people notice. When your clothes get worn, people notice. When you stop participating, people notice. But they rarely ask why. They assume. I tried applying for a different apartment, thinking maybe downsizing would save us. The application process felt like humiliation disguised as paperwork, income verification, credit checks, explanations. I watched the leasing agent's expression change as my credit report loaded. The polite smile faded into something practiced and distant. She told me they'd be in touch. They never were. I applied again and again. Denied, denied, denied. Not because I couldn't pay going forward, but because my past had already been written without my consent. At night, after my child fell asleep, I searched the internet for answers, programs, assistance, anything. I learned how thin the safety net really is when you make just enough to not qualify for help, and not enough to survive without it. The mortgage calls became more aggressive, not cruel, just cold. They spoke to me like a number, a risk, a liability. I tried explaining again about the divorce, about the fraud, about the abandonment. It didn't matter. The system isn't built to care why you fell, only that you did. The day the eviction notice came, I sat on the floor and stared at it for a long time. It felt unreal, like reading someone else's life, like this couldn't possibly be happening to me. I had done everything I was supposed to do. I worked, I loved my child, I paid when I could. And still, we were losing our home. I didn't tell anyone right away. Shame makes you silent. It convinces you that asking for help is weakness, that people will judge you, that they'll see you as irresponsible instead of betrayed. I packed boxes slowly, quietly, after bedtime. I labeled them with words like temporary and storage, even though I didn't know where we were going yet. I found myself grieving things I didn't expect to miss. The hallway where my child learned to walk, the kitchen table where homework happened, the light that came through the window every morning. I wondered how much stability a child could lose before it changed them forever. The final day came faster than I was ready for. I loaded what I could into borrowed space. I looked back at the house one last time, feeling like I had failed at the one thing I wanted most, protecting my child. But here's what I didn't know yet. Losing a house doesn't mean losing your worth. Losing credit doesn't mean losing your strength. And shame does not belong to the person who was betrayed. If you've ever lost something you worked for because of someone else's choices, I want you to tell me in the comments. You are not alone, even when it feels like you are. That night, in a smaller space with fewer comforts, I tucked my child into bed and made a promise I didn't know how to keep yet. We will survive this. And somehow, we did. Rock bottom doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with sirens or warnings or a single dramatic collapse. It arrives quietly, after everything you thought you could lose has already been taken. For me, rock bottom was a small room with thin walls, borrowed furniture, and a silence that felt heavier than noise ever could. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed after my child fell asleep, staring at my hands, realizing that there was nothing left to fall from. No backup plan, no safety net, no one coming to fix what had been broken. Just me. And that realization was terrifying. The first few weeks, I moved on autopilot. Wake up, work, come home, feed my child, pretend we were okay. Survival stripped life down to its bare essentials. Everything else disappeared. I learned how little you actually need when you have no choice. But the nights were the worst. At night, when the world slowed down and there were no distractions, the thoughts came. I replayed every decision, every signature, every moment I trusted him. I asked myself questions that had no mercy. How did I not see this coming? Why didn't I protect myself better? What kind of mother lets this happen to her child? Self-blame is cruel like that. It convinces you that responsibility and fault are the same thing. I told myself that if I had been smarter, stronger, less trusting, this wouldn't have happened. I carried guilt that didn't belong to me, but it felt real enough to hurt just the same. During the day, I rebuilt in small, humiliating steps. I called creditors and explained my story again. I disputed charges, I filed reports, I filled out forms that asked me to relive everything in writing. Some days, I made progress. Other days, nothing moved at all. Rebuilding isn't inspiring in real time. It's tedious, slow, boring. It's doing the same hard things over and over with no guarantee they'll work. I opened a new bank account with a balance so small it felt insulting. But it was mine. No one else's name attached. No one else's access. That mattered more than I realized at the time. I learned about credit in ways no one teaches you unless you fail publicly first. I learned how one missed payment echoes for years, how one person's choices can follow you like a shadow long after they're gone. I started saying no to things I wanted to say yes to. I learned how to explain we can't afford it without shame, even when my chest tightened every time I said it. My child adapted faster than I did. Children are resilient in ways adults aren't. They accept change as long as love stays consistent. Watching my child find joy in small things, a park, a shared meal, laughter in tight spaces, reminded me that stability isn't always about money. Some days that realization saved me. Other days it made the pressure heavier. Because I didn't just want my child to survive, I wanted them to thrive, and thriving felt impossibly far away. I picked up extra work when I could. I sacrificed sleep. I lived in constant calculation. Every dollar had a purpose before it even arrived. I stopped buying things that weren't necessary, not because I was disciplined, but because there was no margin for mistakes. One wrong move could send us spiraling again. And through all of it, the voice in my head never let me rest. You should have known better. You should have protected yourself. You failed. That voice didn't sound like my ex anymore. It sounded like me. Healing doesn't happen when you stop hurting. It happens when you start telling the truth about where the hurt came from. One night, after a long day that ended in tears over something small, I looked at my child, sleeping, and realized something that shifted everything. If this had happened to someone else, a friend, a sister, I would never blame her. I would call her strong. I would call her brave. I would tell her she was surviving something unfair. So why couldn't I say those things to myself? That was the beginning of rebuilding something deeper than credit. Self-trust. I started documenting everything, protecting myself, asking questions, verifying. Not because I was bitter, but because I had learned the cost of blind trust. Slowly, painfully, things began to change. Not in big wins, in inches. A bill paid on time, a small balance reduced, a tiny increase in my credit score. Progress that no one clapped for, but meant everything to me. If you're watching this and you're at your own version of rock bottom, I want you to hear this. Rock bottom is not proof that you are broken. It's proof that you survived something that tried to break you. Tell me in the comments if you're rebuilding right now and where you're watching from. Someone reading your words might realize they're not alone. I didn't know it then, but the worst part was behind me, and the strongest version of me was quietly being built from the ground up. Years passed, not quickly, not dramatically. They passed the way years do when you're rebuilding, quietly, without ceremony, marked by routines instead of milestones. There was no moment where everything suddenly felt fixed. No finish line where I looked around and thought, I made it. What I had instead was stability creeping back into my life so slowly that I almost didn't recognize it when it arrived. I paid my bills on time, every time. That alone felt like a victory. I built habits out of caution. I checked statements. I tracked spending. I asked questions. I protected my name like it was something fragile, because I had learned that it was. My credit score climbed in small, stubborn increments. 10 points here, 5 points there. Numbers most people wouldn't notice, but that felt monumental to me. I bought another car. Not new, not impressive, but reliable. Paid in a way that kept me in control. I sat in it the first day after signing the paperwork, hands on the steering wheel, and cried. Not because of the car, but because no one could take it from me. It was mine. My child grew, and with each year they carried less of the instability and more of the strength. They learned responsibility early, compassion early, independence early. Sometimes I wondered what parts of their childhood were shaped by loss and what parts were shaped by resilience. I hoped the second would outweigh the first. Emotionally, something else was happening. I was changing. The desperation faded. The panic quieted. The constant vigilance softened into awareness. I wasn't waiting for disaster anymore, but I also wasn't open. Trust didn't come back easily. I kept people at a distance, not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. I had learned that proximity without accountability is dangerous. I didn't share details of my life. I didn't merge finances. I didn't hand over control. Love, to me, had become something careful. I stopped explaining my past to people who hadn't earned the context. I learned that survival stories don't need justification. There's a strength that comes from rebuilding your life without applause. A quiet confidence that doesn't need validation because it was forged in isolation. I carried that. And then, one day, without warning, he came back. Not physically, not dramatically. Through a message, a simple line, casual, almost polite. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. I hope you're doing well." I stared at my phone longer than I expected to. Years had passed. Years of silence. Years of rebuilding. Years of becoming someone who no longer lived in survival mode. And yet, there he was, stepping back into my life as if time had paused for him. I didn't respond right away. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel relieved. I felt distant, emotionally removed in a way that surprised me. I realized something in that moment that stopped me cold. I had outgrown the version of myself who needed him to be sorry. The woman reading that message wasn't the woman he left behind. She was financially independent, emotionally guarded, fully aware of her worth. And the space between who I was and who he remembered felt vast. I wondered what he wanted. Closure, forgiveness, access. Because growth changes the questions you ask. If someone hurt you when you were vulnerable, what do they deserve when you're strong? I thought about the nights I cried alone, the years I rebuilt, the stability I created with my own hands. I thought about my child, now old enough to notice patterns, to read between lines. I didn't respond that day, or the next. Because sometimes strength isn't about confrontation. Sometimes it's about deciding who gets a seat at the table of your life. If you've ever outgrown someone who once had power over you, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you believe people should have access to the lives they once damaged. I had built something solid, and I wasn't sure I was willing to risk it. When I finally agreed to meet him, it wasn't because I missed him. It was because I needed to see who he had become, and who I had. We met in a public place, neutral ground, somewhere with witnesses and exits, the kind of place you choose when you've learned to protect yourself without making a scene. He looked older. So did I. Time had touched us differently. It had softened him. It had sharpened me. He started talking immediately about his life, his struggles, his regrets. He spoke as if the years between us were a misunderstanding instead of a disappearance. Then he apologized. Not all at once, not fully. He said he was overwhelmed back then. He said he made mistakes. He said he didn't realize the damage he had caused until much later. I listened quietly. Because apologies sound different when you've already healed. He told me he never meant to ruin me financially, that he didn't think it would spiral the way it did, that he was scared and ashamed and didn't know how to face me once everything collapsed. I noticed what he didn't say. He didn't say he took responsibility. He didn't say he made it right. He didn't say he had tried to fix anything after he left. He said he thought I'd be okay. That sentence settled heavily between us, because being okay is not the same as being unharmed. I asked him if he knew what it cost me, not just in money, but in years. The lost house, the lost credit, the lost sense of safety. I told him about the eviction, the nights I cried silently, the way our child learned to adapt too early. I spoke calmly, not accusing, just honest. He looked shocked. That hurt more than anger ever could, because it meant he had never really imagined my suffering. He had assumed survival meant forgiveness. Then he asked if we could start over, if we could reconnect, if there was a chance. And for a moment, just a moment, I imagined the version of me from years ago, the woman who would have accepted less just to avoid being alone. But she wasn't sitting at that table. I was. And I understood something clearly for the first time. Reconciliation without repair is just access. I told him that I didn't hate him, that I had forgiven him in the way you forgive someone so their absence stops hurting. But forgiveness does not mean reunion. I told him trust is rebuilt with actions, not words, and some damage changes the shape of a relationship forever. I told him I had worked too hard to build a stable life to gamble it on someone who once treated my future like collateral. He asked what he could do, and I told him the truth. Accountability isn't something you ask for after the fact. It's something you choose when it costs you something. I stood up. I wished him well, and I walked away. Not with bitterness, not with regret, with peace. Because the final choice wasn't about him. It was about protecting the life I built and teaching my child what self-respect looks like in real time. If you're watching this and someone from your past has come back asking for access without accountability, I want you to think about this question. Do they want to make things right? Or do they just want to feel better? Drop your answer in the comments and tell me where you're watching from, because sometimes the bravest ending isn't reconciliation. It's choosing yourself.